Ladies and gentlemen, this video is being recorded on February 28th, 2025. Actually, some of you might watch this on March 1st, 2025. Whenever you watch this. Yesterday, the oldest world chess champion alive unfortunately passed away. And this video is dedicated to him. His name is Boris Spassky. Now, the chess community, the chess world, fans of chess, are split a little bit into those that existed, let's say, pre-2020, and before some of the various chess booms, and the ones that came afterward. And so if you're a newer chess fan, you might associate Boris Spassky with 1972, the match against Bobby Fischer, where Bobby Fischer triumphed against all odds and became the world champion. But that's not really the Boris Spassky that incumbent chess fans of many years know. Boris Spassky was an incredible chess player and an incredible human. He was a multiple-time, chess Olympian, Soviet champion, world champion, etc. But I'd like to show you some of the dedications to him posted online, and then I'd like to show you a few games that he played against Larsen, against Tigran Petrosyan, and also against Bobby Fischer himself. We will start with some dedications from the International Chess Federation, followed by Levan Ranyan himself, Garry Kasparov, among many others. One of the most talented players of his generation, 10th world champion, passed away at the age of 88. He was a chess prodigy. He attained the Grandmaster title at 18, played in the Candidates at 19. He defeated Keres, Geller, and Mikhail Tal in 1965, and he earned the right to play for the World Championship. He wasn't successful in that attempt, but he was successful in his second attempt in 1969. And he played in the Olympic teams of both the Soviet Union and France, where he spent the later portion of his life. Here's a fun story from Ranyan. Fascinating person, a great champion. I had a privilege to dine and talk to him on many occasions, and I remember his wonderful sense of humor and witty words. He complimented my play with the black and the Ruy Lopez, and this was, some of the highest praise from one of my biggest heroes. They spoke about music. And a memorable visit, Levon spent a few hours with him and got to hear numerous funny stories about the golden era of chess. Before I left his place, he told me something I still remember. Don't try to become a world champion. The majority of us became champions by accident. There you go. Kasparov shared a story. Here he's looking over Kasparov's shoulder, 1985. Boris was never above befriending and mentoring the next generation, especially those of us who, like him, didn't comfortably fit into the Soviet machine. It was a pleasure to tell my stories and those of others about him in the third volume of Kasparov's book. Rise as a Prodigy, Conquest of the Crown, and so on. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, Fischer and Spassky actually didn't just play a match in 1972. They also played a match in 1992, which could be the subject probably of, an entire documentary, like in and of itself, which was an absolutely wild story. The crazy thing about Spassky is he learned chess, or so it goes. I wasn't present at the time, but the story goes that he learned chess on a train escaping Leningrad during the siege in the Second World War. The context of how some of the great champions of the past have learned the game of chess is wild because, right now we learn chess by watching a YouTube short, downloading the app on our phone, and watching GothamChess videos. It's just, they were built different 80 years ago. You know what I'm saying? I'd like to share 3 games with you. And actually, before I even do that, I'd like to show you a few variations named after Spassky. So there is a variation of the Caro-Kann defense where, it's the main line. Some of you might know this variation as the classical variation of the Caro-Kann. I know this variation, and I actually had no idea until today that this very variation, right here, this variation, where, black stops white from going knight e5, and then white plays this move h5, this is called the Spassky variation. That's pretty wild. I didn't know that. So this position, which I have played 1,000 games in my life with black, I've been playing the Spassky variation. And then there's also the Spanish. There is the Ruy Lopez. There is the Marshall variation. This is the variation Magnus Carlsen plays a lot, named after Frank Marshall. D5, the immediate move. You gambit a pawn in the center of the board, then you get this big attack on white's king, and there's a line on move 18. Spassky used to play the queen retreat to h5, which modern engines deem as the best move, which is just very fascinating. It's not the only move. Black has also played f5 in this position, but it's not the best move. Spassky would play queen h5 to try to get out of the way of an incoming queen trade. And there might be some other smaller variations. You never know. Like, there's always these like little random variations. I'd like to start off by showing you probably like the most destructive game Spassky ever played. I mean, this was monstrous. Then I will show you one of the games he won on the way to becoming the world champion. And then I'm going to show you a game against Robert James Fischer, aka Bobby Fischer, but not from 1972, not that match. I covered that match in a video. You can obviously find it on this channel. No, it's going to be a game that you might have never even seen or heard of. So let's do it. First, let's start with Bent Larsen. All right. So some of you may not know this. Some of you may know this. B3 is called the Nimzowitsch-Larsen attack. It's named after Larsen. Like that Larsen on your screen. Which is pretty cool. And yeah, he played B3. Now, in this particular game, we're about to see E5. So Spassky played in the most principled way. And nowadays, it has been deemed by modern engines to be better to play the move E3 first. It's better to play E3 to prepare the knight, prepare this. Black's next move, D5, simply taking the entire control of the center is too powerful, which is why the best move for white is E3, and then trying to play a move like bishop to B5 and put pressure on the position. Okay, but again, modern engines are not what they had back in the day. And Larsen played this move C4. Knight F6 was the move chosen from Spassky, and after knight F3, he advanced this pawn. Actually, after C4, even modern computers prefer knight E7 with a very quick D5, because after knight F3, you play D5, which is sort of absurd. But if knight takes, you have takes, and the immediate D4, and apparently black is better. So modern engines are so disgusting. They just straight up give white a pawn, but black is better here, according to the computer. Why? Simple. Knight G6, when the bishop retreats, you give a check, you come here. White is just worse. White can't develop bishop easily. Nuts. Okay, this is prep from 70 years ago. Like 60 years ago. E4, knight D4, bishop C5. And again, this move gives black a little bit too much activity. Black temporarily doubles his pawns, but opens up the light squared bishop and opens up the queen and is just better. Might have been a bit better here for white to play knight F5, attacking the pawn on G7. And after D5, which is an attack on the knight, something like this would have happened and the game would have proceeded. But yeah, Larsen gave a little bit too much activity to Spassky, who, again, Spassky had a universal style. He was not a stout defender. He was not some positional savant who never went for complications. He could do it all. He could do it all. He was a true prodigy. It helped him defeat many, many good players in his time. And as you're going to see at toward the end of this video, before the 1972 match against Bobby Fischer, he had 3 wins against Fischer. Like, he was completely undefeated. He was one of the only people in the world that had an answer to Bobby consistently. F4 was the move here, and after 10 moves, white is lost, which is kind of crazy, right? Because these are very, very strong players at the time, but Larsen stumbles into a disaster. The thing is, though, if the tree falls in the forest, right, that whole thing, nobody's there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. If it's minus 2.5, that's not how they thought back then, because they didn't even know what that was, right? Stockfish didn't exist. But of course, it's minus 2.5, but black has to prove it. So how do you prove it here? Well, white's king is in the center, right? I have some pieces staring down. Knight G4. This opens the door for the queen. My idea is to go queen to H4. You can stop that, but now this pawn is a hook, and I'm going to attack it. A hook is a piece in front of a king, a pawn in front of a king that can be targeted, H5. And, if white is able to get knight C3, and even to castle, white is still losing because of knight F2. So the position already, practically speaking, is super busted. h3, and now black has a couple of nice ways to win. One of them is sacrificing the knight on this square, and after takes, you have 2 pawns for the knight, but you're just going to rip apart the position. Queen c5, queen b4, etc. But Spassky won in style. He played h4. Just gave up the knight completely. And then he won in style even more brutally. They traded. Obviously, he's infiltrating. White is basically playing without 3 pieces. I mean, you can even argue 4. They're just sort of all over here. But this is the real beauty. Because here, black has many, again, winning moves. Black can play queen h4. Even if black, like, wastes a move. Never mind. This is why I'm commentating this game many years later. You know, I thought black has the time to do this, but white is going to get to castle. So you cannot dilly-dally. But you have several winning moves, like queen h4 is a winning move. Even sacrificing the bishop is a winning move because you're going to preserve the king in the center. So you have a lot of winning moves. But Boris Spassky, you know, a man after my own heart, sacrifices the rook. Rook h1 is gangster. What a move. The point is simple. You deflect the rook away from g2, and now white cannot stop promotion and the infiltration of the queen. Check. And by the way, you may be confused why Larsen went there. Well, rook g1 would have been queen h4, king d1, and queen h1. And you still lose, right? Because the pawn is still getting promoted. So rook f1, queen h4, king d1, he made a queen, and Larsen resigned. He resigned because after bishop f1, bishop g4, and the queen infiltrates on the first rank. Few people managed to do this to Bent Larsen. All right? And may Bent Larsen also rest in peace. He's a Danish chess legend, passed away, I believe, in 2010. This was an incredible game, but not all games are like that. You don't just get, you know, a crushing attack and the opponent messes up in the opening. This was quite the rivalry. So Spassky came into the 1966 World Championship match a favorite because Petrosyan was the incumbent. He was a solid defender. He was very, very good positionally, good at sacrificing his material and kind of creating the right imbalances. And he was kind of like a stoic player. Spassky could do it all. And like I just told you in the intro, he had this monster run going from the candidates tournament to the World Championship, but he lost that match. He lost in 1966. And when he came back in 1969, this is perhaps my favorite game from all of those games because few people in their lives were able to do such a thing to Petrosyan. So e4, c5. And again, Petrosyan played the French, e5. Back in the day, they could play any opening because there were no computers. You could play the French, you know, you could play anything you wanted. They played the King's Indian defense. Now you couldn't pay a grandmaster money in a top tournament to play the King's Indian defense. Knight f3, d6, and they went for the Knight of Sicilian, the Rolls Royce, the Cadillac. Those are not really comparable. Let's just say the Rolls Royce of chess openings. The bishop goes to g5, right, putting pressure, and now black will choose. All right? So, knight bd7. One of the lines, reinforcing the knight on f6. Bishop goes to c4. Active move. And now queen a5. Queen a5, you know, if you check the database, it's one of the moves. The other alternative is that black plays queen b6, not, you know, to put pressure on this square. So queen a5, queen d2, holding everything together. And Petrosyan said, hey, Boris, what are you doing with the bishop on g5? We're trading. Why? Because even though we're giving up a bishop for a knight, we don't have anywhere else to put the bishop. We don't really want to retreat. There was no point of putting the bishop on g5 if we're going to retreat. So we're making this trade, and we're castling. Every move that white has made so far has been forward. Improving. Develop, 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 develop. Trade, castle, develop. This is like how a Knight or Sicilian is played. You bring every piece, and when everything is set, you go to attack. Now, this position has never been reached before. They kind of broke apart. But, you know, white put everything in the middle, and now is going to attack. Now, as we can see from Stockfish's evaluation, it doesn't think that Petrosyan played in the best way. Like there were probably better ways to play. Here, you know, black maybe could have went for counterplay a little bit faster. E6 and bishop e7 is a little bit too slow. It prefers actually in some positions black castle's queenside, which is completely demented, right? Bishop b3 is just sidestepping b5, and white is ready. The one move that is going to begin the domino effect collapsing on the black position is this move g4. In the Sicilian, white is more than happy to just give the opponent pawns on the king side, especially when the king has gone to the other side of the board. Rook e8. The final preparation, one retreat, two retreat. King is here because the pawn is now protected, and also now you can jump into d5. And, you know, there are moments you want to, for instance, there is a moment you may, in this position, want to play the move knight d5. If this is taken, you take the queen. If the queen takes, you take the bishop with a check. You cannot play knight d5 with the king on c1, because this is check. So king b1 is just always useful. Petrosyan does what he always does. He waves on the bull, right? He waves the red flag. Come on. Okay. g4. Now black has a very difficult decision. Do you take? Do you not take? If you don't take, on the next move, I go g5. Then I'll take h4, h5, g6, h6. Okay. So black takes. Queen g2. That also comes with consequences. Rook g1. There's no mate. There's no checkmate yet. But there will be soon, if you are not careful. Bishop d7. Petrosyan also bringing more pieces, right? This is a vintage Sicilian. Here comes f5. Another pawn being used to break down the black position. Black plays king h8. Anticipating stuff on this diagonal and also anticipating stuff on the g-file. Rook f1. It's kind of funny how a few moves ago we had this position with the queen and the rooks. Now we have this position. It's just interesting, right? 1, 2, 3. Everybody's rotated. Everybody did a little cha-cha slide to the right side of the board. Queen d8. Now we take. How do we break through in this position? Double exclamation point, pawn to e5. Attack on the knight. You have to do something, but more importantly, the point of this move is that after pawn takes, you have the gorgeous move knight e4. And Spassky, of course, was a predecessor of Kasparov. That's why Kasparov wrote the book My Great Predecessors and put Spassky in there. This is a Kasparov-like attack. Kasparov, in a video once which I made here on YouTube and his calculations, said, you know, I have 6 pieces attacking. Black has like 2 defenders. It's just not enough. You cannot really take this knight because rook f6, bulldozer, rook f8 is a checkmate threat. If queen e7, rook h6 is a checkmate threat. So knight e4, Petrosyan went knight h5, queen g6 infiltrated, and a gorgeous final move, knight g5, threatening mate. And if this, queen h5, king here, queen f7, king here, up and over. If e5, you open the diagonal of the bishop, queen g8, and both queen h5 are mate. Nobody in their time did something like this to Petrosyan. 24 moves. 24 moves. And this was en route to winning the World Championship in 1969. And, you know, there so much has been out there about 1972. 1972, you can have a whole 5-part documentary made about it. I made a video about it already. You know, the summary of that match. Spassky, Fischer, they didn't even know if that match was going to happen. 3 to 6 hours before the match actually started. First game, a crazy uncharacteristic blunder by Fischer. Improved. Spassky scored a 4-0 lifetime. Fischer then forfeited the second game. It was 2-0. Crazy. And then, said he wouldn't continue until cameras were removed and so on, and that they were distracting and everything. And ultimately, Fischer won the third game and he kind of ran away with it. And that was a big, big moment in that rivalry. But before that, Spassky had Fischer's number. First time he beat him was 1960. Fischer was young. But then in the 60s, they played several times, and this is one of my favorite games. This was from an Olympiad. The Olympiad is, one of the most prestigious tournaments in chess outside of the World Championship. And after this game, Spassky improved to, at the time, 3-0 against, Bobby Fischer, who was obviously not yet the world champion. You could argue he was the best player in the world, but they were all sort of vying for it. So let's take a look at this game. So Fischer played the Grunfeld defense. Fischer was a combative man. I mean, he played the King's Indian and the Grunfeld, like two of the most dynamic openings, immediately seizing for the advantage. And we had, this variation, the exchange variation of the Grunfeld, bishop g7, bishop c4. And even back then, what I love is like, what is this now? 34 plus, like 60 years ago, 59 years ago. I mean, they were playing modern mainline theory. It's just so incredible to me that they knew the secrets to this opening back then. We have cutting edge technology now telling us that this is the right approach to the Grunfeld defense. This is the main line. I mean, I think this is called the classical variation. This has been played, hundreds of thousands of times if you count online and offline games. It's just amazing. Bishop e3, and now black has several approaches here. Castles, and black can play queen c7, b6. All of these things have been played. Bishop g4 has been played. Knight a5 has been played in this position. It's just fascinating. Queen c7 is the move that Fischer chose. Spassky went rook c1 so that this trade can obviously be met with the improvement on the c file. Rook d8 was the move chosen. And, nowadays, in basically every position, we use the h-pawn. So even now, engine say h4 is the best move in this position. But you can play a lot of stuff. And also, I think even now, people don't play like this. I think people try generally to like get those pieces out. But okay, h3 is the move that Spassky chose. And then he played f4. Like, what I love about this is that, Fischer was the one who would instigate with his opponents and beat them down over the course of time, right? Beat them down throughout the game. But it was Spassky who built up a monstrous center and would adapt his style to Fischer's. So Fischer went knight a5, attacking the bishop, bishop d3, and then he played f5. And I mean, these were colossal guys back then. Like they were, these were the guys at the top of the heap. f5 is combative. c5 attacking from the flank down the middle with the bishop. Meanwhile, look at this armada of pieces here. And here, I mean, I love this move. Boris Spassky here played g4. Imagine playing g4 at the ultimate tournament, the Olympiad, and just walking around. I mean, the ocean of complications here, how everything can take everything else, right? Everything. There's pieces interacting left and right. Black can play queen f7, fe, bishop b7, just a million possibilities, right? Fischer took on e4 and traded off white's bishop, trying to poke a hole in the position. Spassky played knight g3. Now Fischer infiltrated with his knight, trying to get rid of both white bishops. Spassky allowed the queen to stand so powerfully on this diagonal and just backed up. He just backed up. Like he understood pace. He understood how to control the game, created a threat of his own, which then Fischer had to defend. Now you have this position, right? You're kind of like, what am I doing here? Am I going to an endgame? Am I building in the middle? What am I doing? He plays queen e2, targeting this knight. Fischer takes on d4, Spassky takes on d4, and we have b5. And like, it's so imbalanced, right? It's quite clear, like at some point, white might break through with an attack, but black has a 2-on-1. If we go to any endgame, black could have certain advantages there where that pawn could be a really big problem for white. So Spassky has to be quick. He baits Fischer into just giving up the center pawn completely, but in winning that pawn, Fischer would be weakening his king, right? But at this point, Fischer had lost a couple of games to Spassky. So, he's really baiting him, and Fischer obliges. He says, I'm not afraid. Bring it on, right? So we have knight to g5. Bishop takes f2, rook takes f2. Now Fischer's up a pawn, but the king is feeling a little bit exposed over there, right? You don't know. Maybe you're going to get into the position. Maybe a pawn break. Maybe bringing the rook over. Will that pawn advantage matter in the long run? Rook d6. The game is hovering at zeros, right? Because it's such a high-level game. Are we going to bring this rook over? Yes, we will. Rook e1, right? Improving the position. f5 ideas. h4, h5 ideas, right? Both of those moves hang a queen. I'm just saying in the long run. But this knight is such a monster. It's an offensive piece. It's a defensive piece. Queen b6, pinning. But that one move, the line bounces from 0.0 to 0.1 a little bit. And now Fischer comes in, allowing this infiltration. This is crazy. Knight to f6, allowing the infiltration. King goes to the corner. Spassky grabs a pawn back. Now we are looking at a position that could result in an endgame. Something like this, right? Where, dynamically speaking, I think black is defeated because white is faster. But black is getting off the baseline, right? Knight f7 can play defense, and in the long run, can create some counterplay. Fischer was not going to no endgame. He's not trying to defend an endgame. He's trying to play dynamic chess. But here, black has two choices. By the way, if you're wondering, why can't we take this, right? The rook is hanging. So black has two choices. Rook d8 and go down the center line, or rook f8 and try to fight back on the f-file. It just takes one inaccuracy. You know, Fischer probably thought the rook is redundant on d8 because the rook here doesn't even need defending. Doesn't need defending. I mean, it's already defended, and also there's a pin, and I'm threatening this. But a calm move like rook f1, and suddenly it's not so simple. Like, again, Spassky's down a pawn, but he's still pushing. He's still pushing, and his king is safer than black's king. And Fischer makes a mistake. And what he blundered here was a ghost move. Rook takes d2. It looks impossible. But after this, there is a fork. But there is a counter fork. I threaten the knight and a vicious discovered attack against your king, forcing you to play the move queen to b6. It's the only move in the position. Because now we have to trade the queens. I play rook d1, you defend. It's not pretty. It's not a pretty position. But then I'm going to try to infiltrate and get to your king. You can barely defend yourself. Rook e1 and rook d3, which is not findable. Creating a counterattack and trying to seal off like this. It looks like you just lose. But somehow by a miracle you don't. Fischer went rook d8. That was a mistake. Because after knight d5, king g8, there is rook f2. And the knight is stuck. But more than anything else, now there's an infiltration ready. Rook e8 check is the threat. It is, because rook takes, knight takes c7. Fischer played rook d6, rook e8 check, king f7. And for the second time in this video, Boris Spassky, man after my own heart, sacrificed the rook. Rook to f8, an absolute dagger. Because if you go king e6, it's queen e4 and mate, not mate and 1, because you hang your queen. If you take, I infiltrate, I pick up the pawn, and I win the queen. And then I'm going to, win, frankly, everything else, right? I'm going to take this and this, and rook f8. This is 1966. 6 years. Actually, I think this was 1970 even. I have to double check, but it was a few years before their world championship. Yeah, and I mean Spassky was a maniac. I mean, he was so good. He played so accurately this game, and he was positional. He was tactical. He was calculated. He was smooth. Like, he just controlled games when he played. And obviously, as you see from the stories about him, an absolute legend, a gentleman, and a very kind soul. He was the youngest living world chess champion. He defeated like 6 different world champions more than once. Guys like Kasparov, Karpov, etc. Just a very special individual, somebody linked in history to one of the most talked about chess matches of all time. And, we lost a legend today. Yesterday, I should say. But his memory, both on and off the chessboard, will live on forever. So there you go. Hopefully, I don't have to make too many, memorial videos. Wishing health and happiness to all the living chess legends. That's all I've got for you today. And you can check out more about Spassky all over the internet, on this channel, chess games, etc. I'll see you in the next video. No, get out of here today, out of respect. So that's all.